The plate hit the floor, and the entire cafeteria laughed. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, just knelt on the concrete and picked up the pieces with bare hands, while 30 elite Navy trainees watched and decided she was nothing. They were wrong. The woman scrubbing grease off their trays had put 17 rounds through a target at 1,400 meters in driving rain with a punctured lung. They just didn't know it yet. If stories like this one hit different for you, drop your city and country in the comments. Hit subscribe, because what happens next in this base is going to shake you. Now let's go back to the beginning. The alarm on Mara Hartwell's phone went off at 4:47 a.m., not 4:45, not 5:0, 4:47, because that was the exact number of minutes she needed to dress, brush her teeth, fill her thermos, and be out the door before the first bus pulled away from the corner of Clement and 9th. She had timed it. She had timed everything. For 14 months now. Routine was the only thing standing between her and the thing she refused to think about before sunrise. She pulled on her gray uniform shirt in the dark. The name patch said Hartwell. The fabric was worn soft at the shoulders from too many industrial washes. She pressed her thumb to the name once and let go. Outside, Redstone Naval Training Base sat in the pre-dawn dark like a machine that never fully slept. Floodlights buzzed over the obstacle course. A drill sergeant somewhere was already shouting. Mara walked through the contractor entrance with her badge held flat, didn't make eye contact with the gate guard, and headed straight for the service corridors that smelled like bleach and floor wax. She had been here long enough that the kitchen staff stopped noticing her. That was the goal. The cafeteria at Redstone ran on military time and military volume. By 530, the first training class was filing through the line 30 men and women in identical PT gear, hair damp from a pre-dawn run, trays scraping across the steel rails. Mara worked the serving station, moving scrambled eggs from the pan to the tray, pan to tray, pan to tray, a rhythm that required nothing from her mind. She preferred it that way. More eggs, a tray shoved forward. She spooned without looking up. Hey, the tray shoved again, harder. I said more. She looked up. Senior Chief Derek Rourke was not a tall man, but he stood like he thought he was. Mid-40s, with a jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically for sneering, and the kind of sunburned neck that came from too many years, shouting at people outdoors. He wore his rank pins like they were medals. Mara had been watching him for 3 weeks. She had already categorized him, the type who mistakes cruelty for authority and has been doing it long enough that he can't tell the difference anymore. Sure, she loaded another spoonful onto his tray. That's it? That's all you've got to say? Sure. He looked back at the trainees behind him with a grin. You all see this? Cafeteria girls got real big energy this morning. A few of the trainees laughed. Most of them watched the floor. Mara set the serving spoon back in the pan. You want more eggs or not, Senior Chief? I want service. You know what that word means? You're here to serve. He drew the word out like it had 2 syllables of contempt. That means you smile. That means you say yes, Senior Chief. That means you move like you got somewhere to be instead of standing there like you're waiting for a bus. The trainee directly behind Rourke Young, maybe 22, with a buzz cut and the look of someone trying very hard not to exist, stared at the food rail. Mara held Rourke's gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to be intentional, short enough to not be insubordination. Yes, Senior Chief, she said. He moved on. Her break was at 930. She took it in the loading dock behind the kitchen, sitting on an overturned milk crate with her thermos and a granola bar she didn't taste. The base beyond the fence was running another training cycle. She could hear it. The rhythm of commands, the collective sound of boots, the crack of something being reset in the range area to the east. She knew the sound of ranges. She had spent years living inside them. Don't. She ate the granola bar. She looked at the fence. A trainee jogged past the dock on the interior path, then stopped, doubled back. Male, early 20s, the kind of build that came from years of specific work rather than a gym. He was breathing hard, but controlled it quickly. "You're the cafeteria contractor," he said. Not unkind, just observational. That's what the badge says. "Rourke's a dick. I apologize for him." She looked at him. "Don't apologize for someone else's behavior. It's not yours to carry." The trainee blinked, like that was not the response he expected. "Kyle Mercer," he said. "Good luck on your cycle, Kyle Mercer." He lingered another second, then nodded and jogged on. She watched him go. There was something practiced about the way he moved, efficient and self-aware. Either prior service or a family background in it. She filed it away without meaning to. She still did that. 14 months of cafeteria work had not changed the way her brain assembled tactical profiles of people walking by her. Some training doesn't come out in the wash. The incident happened at 1145 during the second lunch service. The kitchen was at full chaos, pans clanging, steam rising off the line, voices overlapping. Mara was moving a full sheet tray of ceramic plates from the washing rack when her heel caught the rubber mat edge. She didn't fall. She caught herself against the counter, one hand slapping the surface. But the tray tilted, and 4 plates went over the edge and hit the concrete floor with sound like a small explosion. Fragments scattered 6 feet in every direction. The cafeteria went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then it didn't. The laughter came from the far end of the room, where 2 tables of off-rotation trainees sat with their food. One of them she'd seen him before. Kay Mercer's training partner, a thick-necked kid named Boyle, started clapping slowly. "Nice one, cafeteria girl." Someone else picked it up. Then a few more. Mara knelt and started picking up the pieces with her hands. No gloves there hadn't been time. She worked methodically, stacking the larger fragments first, then sweeping the smaller ones toward the wall, so no one caught one underfoot. "Somebody get a mop," she said to no one in particular, and meant it practically. "Better clean it up before the senior chief sees." Boyle called over. "Unless you want another lesson in service." That got a bigger laugh. She didn't hurry, didn't slow down. Her hands moved at exactly the pace they needed to. "You're bleeding?" She looked up. The man standing beside her was older, mid-50s, probably, with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from being calm, but from having been in enough situations that required calm that it became the default. He wore working utilities without any of Rourke's theatrical presence. His rank insignia read Master Chief, and below that, Mercer O. Owen Mercer. She'd heard his name in the kitchen. The trainees talked about him the way they talked about weather, a constant, impossible to ignore, occasionally severe. "Your hand," he said. She glanced down. A hairline cut across 3 fingers, barely bleeding. She'd picked up plate fragments faster than she'd realized. "I'm fine. He crouched beside her and without ceremony began picking up the larger ceramic pieces alongside her. A Master Chief on his knees in the cafeteria. 2 trainees nearby stopped mid-law. "You don't have to do that," Mara said. "I know." He set a fragment on the tray. His eyes tracked to her hands, not the injury, the way she was holding the pieces, the precise pressure of her grip. She noticed him noticing. She shifted her hands slightly. "Too late. How long have you been contracting here?" he asked. 14 months. "You like it?" She thought about the question longer than she needed to. "It's quiet." He looked at her, then really looked, the way she had learned to identify in her previous life. Not curiosity, assessment. "Quiet," he repeated. "Sure." He stood, took the tray, and handed it to a kitchen staffer who had finally appeared with a mop. Then he walked back toward his table without looking at her again. Mara stayed kneeling for another second. She could still feel the exact point where his attention had sharpened. Too smart, she thought. Stay clear of that one. The armory incident happened 3 days later, and it was not something she'd planned. She was restocking the beverage station outside the training armory hallway, a service corridor that contractors used twice a week, when she heard the armorer running his mouth to a pair of trainees about the afternoon live fire exercise. Brand new issue, straight out of the crate. You'll have better accuracy on the qual course than last cohort, guaranteed. The armorer had one of the training rifles in his hands, an M4 variant, unloaded, being used to demonstrate some point about optics adjustment. He was holding it in a way that told Mara he was comfortable with it, but not deeply familiar. His thumb tracked over the lower receiver as he talked. She stopped stalking. The light in the corridor was fluorescent and slightly uneven, which was why she saw it, and he hadn't a hairline fracture along the left side of the receiver, barely wider than a thread, starting just below the takedown pin and running diagonally toward the pistol grip. It was the kind of fault that would be invisible in bad lighting and catastrophic under firing stress. She put down her stock crate. "Excuse me." The armorer turned. The two trainees looked at her with mild confusion. She was, to them, a beverage restocking contractor, which was approximately 3 social rungs below invisible. "That receiver has a fracture," she said. "Left side, just below the upper takedown pin, running about 40 millimeters. The armorer stared at her. "Ma'am, these weapons were cleared this morning." "I understand that." "The fracture is on the lower receiver's left flat. It runs diagonally. In the right angle of fluorescent light, it catches a shadow line you'd need to know what to look for." She paused. "It won't hold up under cyclic fire. The stress concentration at the fracture point is going to cause receiver failure, probably within the first 2 magazines." Complete silence in the corridor. "You want to check it," she said. It wasn't a question. The armorer brought it to his station under the bright bench light. 40 seconds later, he went very still. "Son of a..." He looked up. The two trainees looked at each other. Mara picked up her stock crate and kept moving. She made it back to the beverage station before she heard footsteps behind her faster than she liked. Hey, wait." She turned. One of the trainees, the younger one, with a kind of earnest face that hadn't been worn down yet, was looking at her like she'd just walked on water. "How did you see that?" "The light hit it right," she said. "Nobody else saw it." "I know." He opened his mouth again. She had a read on what was coming. "Who are you? Where did you learn that?" So she cut it off gently. "You should get back to your prep. Live fires in 2 hours." She turned and walked away. Behind her, she could hear him not moving for a long moment, watching her go. The story was all over the base by dinner. She heard it through the kitchen wall trainees, talking in the hall, voices carrying through the serving partition. The story had already grown in the telling. The cafeteria woman spotted a cracked receiver from 20 feet away. Nobody else caught it. Not the armorer, not the QC check that morning, nobody. By the time the third version reached her, she'd been upgraded from beverage stocker to full kitchen staff, and the receiver fracture had become a near catastrophic failure that she'd prevented. None of that was exactly wrong. Senior Chief Rourke found out at 1,700. She didn't see his face when he was told, but she heard his voice 15 minutes later when he came into the cafeteria during cleanup and found her wiping down the serving counter. "You." He stopped at the far end of the counter. "The receiver story." She kept wiping. "The armorer can tell you what he found." "I'm asking you." "Hairline fracture, lower receiver, left flat." It was visible under the bench light. "And how did you know what to look for?" She folded the cloth in half. "I've been around a lot of hardware." "Around a lot of hardware." He said it with the tone he used for things he wanted other people to hear him say. There were 2 junior staff still in the kitchen. She could see them listening behind the stable. "What does that mean? You wash dishes somewhere with a gun range attached?" "Senior Chief, I'm asking a question. You're a cafeteria contractor. You stock beverages and serve eggs. So how does a cafeteria contractor recognize a stress fracture on an M4 lower receiver from a hallway?" She held his gaze for the full beat of the question. "I listened," she said. and I looked carefully. Rourke studied her for a long moment. She watched his jaw work slightly the calculation behind his eyes, deciding what angle to come from next. "I'm watching you," he said finally. Quietly, this time, which was worse than the loud version. She nodded once. "Okay." He left. Mara finished wiping the counter. When the two kitchen staffers finally looked away, she exhaled very slowly through her nose, and pressed one palm flat against the cold steel of the serving rail. Her hand was steady. That was still the one thing she could count on. The next morning, Owen Mercer was sitting at the end of the contractor entrance bench when she came in, not waiting for her, or at least positioned to deny it if asked. He had a tablet in his hands and a coffee, and he looked up with the ease of someone who had been watching the gate for 20 minutes and planned to act like he hadn't. "Morning," he said. She stopped. "Master Chief, that was something you did yesterday with the receiver. The armorer found the fracture," she said. "I just pointed him in the right direction. From a hallway, under ambient fluorescent lighting." She didn't respond. "I've been doing this 26 years, Mercer said. He wasn't looking at her now, looking at his tablet. "I've trained a lot of people. I know what certain kinds of attention look like. The way someone watches a space they're moving through. The way someone holds their hands." He clicked the tablet dark. "You're not what you say you are." The sentence landed without inflection. It wasn't an accusation. It was just what he believed. Mara let the silence sit for 5 full seconds. One of the skills she'd held on to. "I'm the cafeteria contractor, Master Chief. That's what my badge says." He looked at her. His expression did something complicated, and then resolved into neutral. "Right," he said. He stood, tucked his tablet under his arm, and walked toward the training facility. He stopped at the door. "You might want to get those cuts looked at," he said, without turning. "Ceramic fragments can be deceptive. Look shallow, sometimes isn't." The door closed behind him. Mara looked down at her hand. The cuts were fine. She'd cleaned them last night with the kit she kept under her bathroom sink, antiseptic, butterfly closures, the kind of fast, methodical care that had become automatic years ago when professional medical attention wasn't always an available option. She stood into the entrance for a moment longer. Then she went to work. 4 days passed. Rourke moved on to a new cohort of trainees and redirected his energy toward grinding them into useful shapes. Kyle Mercer, she'd learned he was Owen Mercer's nephew, which explained the name, and some of the attitude, ran PT laps she could see from the beverage station window every morning at 500. Lieutenant Elena Cross, the base's range training officer, walked through the cafeteria twice a day and made a point of looking through her like she was furniture, which was fine. Furniture was the goal. She was beginning to think she'd gotten away with it. Then the senator's office called the base. She didn't know that right away. What she knew was that on a Thursday afternoon, a convoy of black SUVs pulled through the main gate, and by the time she was informed, because someone had to inform the cafeteria contractor about the VIP tour routing, so she'd stay out of the way, the convoy included a senator, 3 aides, a communications officer, and the senator's son. His name was Carter Aldis, 24 years old. She'd seen the advance sheet they posted in the service corps. He had the look of someone who had spent his whole life in rooms where everyone deferred to him and had developed the specific kind of entitlement that comes from who had the power to make it stick. By someone who had the power to make it stick. She knew the type. She'd run into it in dress uniforms and in civilian clothes, in conference rooms and in forward operating bases, and the rank on the collar never changed what was underneath. The tour came through the cafeteria at 1,430. She was at the back loading dock when it happened. She heard it before she saw it, voices from the C corridor, a door swinging open that shouldn't have been. Carter Aldis had separated from the tour group. She was coming back from the dock with a case of coffee supplies, and he was just there, filling the corridor with his phone out and the particular energy of someone who thought his presence was a gift. Hey, he spotted her. Where's the range from here? This is a service corridor. The tour's through the front facility. I know where the tour is. He stepped closer. I'm asking about the range. Wanted to see the shooting setup. You'd need to go back to the main group and request the range access through your escort. Or you could just show me. She shifted the supply case to her other arm. I can't do that. He reached out and grabbed her arm. Not hard, not aggressive. Exactly. The casual grip of someone who'd learned that touching people's arms was how you redirected them and had never paid a price for it. His hand closed around her forearm, just below the elbow. Mara went very still. Every part of her tactical training had a word for this moment, a protocol, a decision tree, a hierarchy of force. She ran through it in approximately half a second. He wasn't a threat. He was an obstacle behaving badly. The correct response was minimum necessary. She turned her wrist inward, rotated her forearm across his grip, trapped his hand between her arm and her body, and applied 3 pounds of specific pressure to his wrist in the direction it was not designed to flex. He released her. He stepped back. His face went from surprise to outrage in the same second. What the hell? Don't grab people, she said. Her voice was even. Completely flat. That's all. She picked up the supply case where she'd set it against the wall. Behind Carter Aldous, she could hear footsteps, the tour group, or part of it, catching up. What she didn't know was that one of Rourke's trainees had been in the cross corridor the entire time. He'd seen everything. And the senator's son was already pulling out his phone. The corridor filled fast. Senator Aldous came through the door first, in the controlled fury of someone who had learned to package his anger in parliamentary language. Behind him, 2 aides. Behind them, the base's VIP escort officer, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. Carter was already talking before his father reached him. She attacked me, completely unprovoked. I was asking for directions, and I heard you the first time. The senator looked at Mara. The look was not angry. It was the more dangerous kind dismissive. The kind that had already decided. Who are you? Cafeteria contractor, sir. And you put your hands on my son. He grabbed my arm. I removed his hand. She twisted my wrist. I applied a wrist release. Minimum contact. She kept her voice neutral. Matter of fact. He can demonstrate full range of motion if anyone's concerned. Carter's face went red. You think this is funny? No. Do you have any idea who my father is? Yes, she said. Senator Aldous, Armed Services Committee. I saw the advance sheet. The senator's expression shifted slightly, not softened, recalibrated. Then you understand, he said slowly, that this is a serious situation, and that your employment here is going to be a very short conversation. Dad Carter. One word flat. Carter went quiet. The senator looked at the escort officer. I want this woman's supervisor here in the next 5 minutes. And I want a full account of what happened. Senator, I can... 5 minutes. The escort officer pulled his radio. Mara stood with her supply case and said nothing. And she was doing the calculation, the one she'd hoped she would never have to do at this base. How much attention this would bring. How many people would be looking at her personnel file by morning. Whether 14 months of careful quiet were about to come undone in a service corridor because a 24-year-old couldn't take his hands off someone who didn't want to be touched. She heard movement behind her, turned slightly. The trainee who'd been in the cross corridor she'd forgotten about him. He was young, couldn't be more than 21, with a straight-backed stillness that suggested someone who'd been taught to stand correctly before they were taught to walk correctly. Military family. He was watching the senator with an expression she recognized. Someone deciding whether to speak. He decided. I saw it, he said. Everyone turned. Trainee. The escort officer's voice carried a warning note. I was in the cross corridor. I saw the whole thing. The trainee looked at the senator, not at Carter, which told Mara something about his character. Mr. Aldous grabbed her arm first. She used a release technique. one motion. She didn't strike him, she didn't push him, she didn't follow through. It was clean and it was done. He paused. Sir Carter stared at him. You weren't even... I was. I can show you exactly where I was standing. The corridor went quiet. Senator Aldous looked at his son. Carter's jaw tightened. The senator's jaw did the same thing clearly inherited, and Mara watched the man do a calculation of his own. Public scenes a witness who was in uniform and therefore credible, a VIP escort incident that would end up in someone's report regardless of outcome. I want to speak with base command, the senator said finally. Yes, sir, the escort officer said with the voice of a man who'd just been handed a live grenade. And I want this contractor's file pulled. Full employment record. The bottom of Mara's stomach went cold. She didn't let it reach her face. Understood, the escort officer said. The senator put his hand on Carter's shoulder and steered him back down the corridor without another word. Carter looked back once at Mara, the specific look of someone making a mental note. The crowd thinned. The trainee was still standing in the cross-corridor entrance. He caught Mara's eye and gave a small, awkward nod. Like he wasn't sure if he'd helped or made things worse. She gave him the same nod back. Then she picked up her supply case, walked to the kitchen, and did not let herself think about the personnel file until she was behind a closed door. The summons came at 1,615. A junior aide from base administration found her in the kitchen during cleanup and handed her a printed slip with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been told not to make it a scene. Commander Victoria Hale's office. 1,700 hours. She had 45 minutes. She washed her hands, untied her apron, folded it over the counter hook. The two kitchen staffers pretended not to watch. She walked out the service entrance and took the long route to the command building because she needed the time and the air. The basins in late afternoon had a different quality to it, the hard-edged noise of training hours softening into the administrative hum of shift change. Trainees moved in clusters, some still in PT gear, some in utilities. An instructor jogged past on the main path with the controlled efficiency of someone for whom jogging was never casual. Somewhere across the base, a range was running late quals, she could hear it. The specific pattern of controlled semi-auto fire, steady and deliberate. She breathed through it. You don't have to be that person anymore, she told herself. You just have to get through this conversation and come out the other side, still employed. She didn't quite believe it. Commander Victoria Hale's office was small and ordered in the way of someone who had made peace with small spaces. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked out over the administrative parking lot. A framed photograph on the wall unit's insignia, the kind with too many people in it to make out individual faces from across the room. A rack of files closed. A coffee machine that looked like it had been there since the Reagan administration. Hale herself was behind the desk when Mara knocked and entered. Mid-40s, compact, with the kind of face that had spent years learning to give nothing away and had gotten very good at it. She was reading something on her screen, and she let Mara stand for a moment before she looked up. Sit down, she said. Mara sat. You want to tell me what happened this afternoon? Senator Aldous' son grabbed my arm in the service corridor. I used a wrist release and asked him not to touch me. He objected to the release. Carter Aldous is claiming you attacked him. There was a witness. I know. Trainee Delgado. Hale folded her hands on the desk. His account matches yours. The incident itself is not the concern. Mara waited. The senator requested your employment record, Hale said. Full file. I know. And you understand why that's a problem. It wasn't a question. Mara looked at the window. The parking lot was empty, except for 2 sedans and a pickup truck. She could see the fence line beyond it, and beyond that, the edge of the training ground. Commander, she said, I'd like to know what you already know. Hale held her gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to her desk, opened a drawer, and placed a single printed sheet on the surface between them. Mara looked at it. She recognized the header Department of Defense, Personnel Management Division. Below that, a case number she had memorized without meaning to. And below that, 3 words in bold, clearance required, Alpha. I pulled it this morning, Hale said, after the receiver incident. Not because of today. She let that sit. When I tried to open the full file, I was referred to a classified personnel management branch I've never dealt with in 21 years of service. They told me access requires extraordinary clearance and approval from a specific command authority. She paused. I've filed 2 requests. Neither has been returned yet. Mara said nothing. The senator won't get clearance to see that file, Hale continued. But his people are going to find the wall, and that wall is going to make them more interested, not less. That's how these things work. Yes, Mara said. So I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like you to understand that I'm asking as the person who is currently responsible for this base's function and for the personnel on it. Hale leaned forward slightly. Who are you? The question hung in the air. Mara looked at the sheet on the desk. The case number. The 3 bolded words. She thought about her apartment off base. The alarm at 4:47. The granola bar she didn't taste. The thermos and the bus, and the 14 months of careful, deliberate quiet. I'm the cafeteria contractor, she said. Hale studied her. Then she picked up the sheet and put it back in the drawer. Senior Chief Rourke has requested a formal review of your employment status, she said, based on the Aldous incident. He's arguing you used excessive force on a civilian VIP. The trainees' account, I know what Delgado's account says. I'm telling you what Rourke filed. Hale stood, moved to the window, looked out. Rourke's been here 9 years. He's got institutional weight, and he's got a reason to dislike you now that has nothing to do with Senator Aldous. The receiver, Mara said. You made him look careless in front of his cohort. Men like Rourke don't forget that. Mara sat with that. What happens to my employment? She asked. It's under review, which means for the next several days you come to work, you do your job, and you don't give him anything else to file. Hale turned from the window. And you stay out of service corridors when VIP groups are on base. Understood. One more thing. Hale's voice shifted, not softer, exactly, but more direct. Dropping the administrative register, whatever is in that file, whatever you're carrying around under that uniform shirt, it's starting to show. Not to everyone, but to some people. A pause. Rourke sees a target. Mercer sees something else. The difference matters. Mara stood. Is that all, Commander? Hale looked at her for a moment that lasted a beat longer than professional. For now, she said. Mara walked back across the base in the early evening light. The training grounds were quieter now, the day's cycles done. A few trainees stretched near the obstacle course. A pair of instructors walked the perimeter path in conversation, hands behind their backs. The range to the east was silent. Quals finished, weapons cleared and racked. She passed the armory building without looking at it. She passed the cafeteria without looking at it. She went to the contractor parking area, sat on the hood of her 8-year-old Honda, and looked at nothing in particular for a while. The light was going orange along the fence line. A crow landed on a nearby post, decided she wasn't interesting, and left. Her right hand rested on her knee. She looked at it, the 3 butterfly-closed cuts from the plate fragments, the calluses that had never fully softened in 14 months of civilian work. The way her thumb sat slightly lower than it should from a joint injury she'd had, reconstructed 6 years ago. A surgeon had told her the thumb would never be the same. She'd proven him wrong at a qualification shoot 8 months later. She hadn't shot since Daniel. She pushed that away. The thing Hale had said sat with her, it's starting to show. She'd known it was possible. She'd just believed that if she kept her head down long enough, kept the routine tight enough, the alarm at 4:47 and the granola bar and the bus and the serving spoon, it would eventually become true. That she would actually become what she was pretending to be. A cafeteria contractor. A nobody. Someone whose past was sealed behind 3 words and an access wall and 26 months of classified mission records. The crow came back to the post, looked at her again. Yeah, she thought. Me too. She was almost at the contractor exit when she heard Rourke behind her. Hartwell. She stopped, turned. He was alone, which told her this wasn't official. He had a folder under his arm, physical, not digital, which told her he'd been doing paperwork, which told her he'd been working late for a reason. The base behind him was half lit in the dusk. A distance away, she could see the lights on in the training facility, where some late administrative cycle was still grinding through. You think today went well for you, he said. I think today happened, she said. I'm not sure well or poorly are the right categories. You put your hands on a senator's son. I removed his hand from my arm. In a military facility, during a VIP tour, using what a witness described as a technique, he drew the word out. Cafeteria workers don't use techniques, Hartwell. They say, "Sir, please don't do that," and they find their supervisor. They don't conduct wrist locks. She didn't respond. Your file's sealed, he said. I found the wall this afternoon. Interesting wall. He watched her face. She gave him nothing, and she could see that frustrated him. He was looking for the reaction, the flinch, the tell. Alpha clearance. That's not a contractor designation. That's not even most officer designations. I wouldn't know what it means, she said. No, you wouldn't. He tilted his head slightly. Cafeteria worker. The words sat in the air between them, like something with weight. I'm going to find out who you are, he said. Not loud. Not theatrical. The quiet version, which she'd already identified as the worst one. Whatever you're hiding behind that file, whatever reason a cafeteria contractor has for a classified personnel record, I'm going to find it. And when I do, I'm going to make sure every person on this base knows it. Mara looked at him. She thought about 14 months. She thought about 4:47 in the morning and granola, bars, and the sound of ranges she made herself not listen to. She thought about what it had taken to get here, to this base, to this apron, to this particular version of quiet, and how much of herself she had folded up and sealed away to make it possible. She thought about Daniel. Good night, Senior Chief, she said. She turned and walked through the contractor exit. Behind her, she heard him open the folder, and she heard him start making a phone call. The phone call lasted 4 minutes. She knew because she counted. Old habit, when you couldn't hear both sides of a conversation, you timed it. 4 minutes was long enough to reach someone, explain a situation, and get an answer. Short enough that the answer wasn't complicated. Rourke had someone to call. That meant he had a direction. She drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and when she got to her apartment, she did not turn on the lights right away. She stood in the dark kitchen for a moment, hand on the counter, and let herself understand that the situation had changed. Not collapsed. Not yet, but changed. The folder under his arm had been physical. That meant printed records things he'd already pulled, already organized. He hadn't started looking when she left. He'd started before the Aldous incident. Maybe before the receiver. Maybe the day she'd held his gaze 3 seconds too long over the serving counter and said yes, Senior Chief, in the particular tone that she thought she'd buried, but apparently hadn't buried deep enough. She opened the refrigerator, looked at it, closed it, sat at the kitchen table in the dark and did not think about Daniel. She did that for 40 minutes. Then she went to bed. The next morning, she was at the gate at 512, badge out, same as always. The guard ran it through the same as always. The service corridor smelled like bleach and floor wax the same as always. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. She worked the breakfast service with the kind of focus that looked like nothing from the outside eggs, pan, tray, repeat, while her peripheral awareness cataloged every deviation from normal. The trainees who glanced at her longer than usual. The kitchen staffer who seemed to have been told something and was being careful not to show it. The fact that Rourke did not come through the breakfast line at all, which was abnormal for a Thursday. Kyle Mercer came through at 610, moving fast, tray held loose. He slowed when he reached her station. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine. Eggs?" "Sure." He watched her serve them. "Yesterday got complicated." "It's handled. Rourke was in the admin building at 1900 last night. I saw him going in when I was coming back from the gym." She looked at Kyle. He had the expression of someone who wasn't sure if he was helping or inserting himself somewhere he shouldn't be, and had decided to do it anyway. "He files a lot of paperwork," she said. "Not at 1900 on a Thursday." She put the surfing spoon back. "Get some sleep, Kyle. You've got quals next week." He picked up his tray and moved on. But he looked back once before he sat down, and it wasn't the look of a trainee checking out a cafeteria worker. It was the look of someone doing the same cataloging she was. She noticed it and filed it. Lieutenant Elena Cross came through the cafeteria at 800, which was unusual because Cross normally used the officer's mess in the training facility. She came through alone, in her working uniform, and didn't take a tray. She walked the length of the serving line with the deliberate pace of someone who wanted to appear casual and was not quite achieving it. She stopped at the beverage station, poured a cup of coffee. She'd clearly had no intention of drinking, and looked at Mara. "I heard about yesterday," Cross said. "Then you're caught up," Mara said. Cross had the kind of face that was built for skepticism's sharp angles, eyes that defaulted to a narrow setting. She was maybe 35, with the rack on her uniform that said she'd worked for everything she had and knew exactly where she stood on the base hierarchy. She didn't like Mara. She'd made that clear in the small, consistent ways that people use when they can't make it explicit, the slightly too long look, the way she never acknowledged Mara directly, unless she had to. "Rourke's going to push this," Cross said, quietly, like she was saying it to the coffee cup. "I expect so. He's got more reach than you might think for a senior chief." Mara looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" Cross was quiet for a moment. She set the coffee cup down. "I don't know what you are," she said. "I don't know what's in that file or why the clearance wall is where it is, and I'm not asking. But I know that Rourke doesn't stop when he decides someone's a problem. And I know that you handled Carter Aldis in about half a second with a technique I recognized, and a cafeteria contractor shouldn't know that technique." She picked up the coffee again. "I just thought you should know the terrain." "Appreciate it," Mara said. Cross looked at her for another beat, then walked out without drinking the coffee. Mara watched her go and tried to figure out what that conversation had been. A warning, maybe. Or reconnaissance, finding out how Mara would respond to being approached, what her tells were. Cross was smart enough to run either play and make it look like the other one. She didn't trust it, but she filed it too. 3 days passed in a contained, watchful quiet. Rourke was present, but not direct. She saw him at the edges of the day, in the peripheral spaces. Crossing the quad when she was walking the supply route. Standing in the corridor outside the kitchen, in conversation with the base's contract administration officer. A brief meeting that ended when she came into view, and both of them went quiet with the particular silence of people who'd been discussing something they hadn't finished discussing. She kept her head down. She ran the alarm at 4:47, the granola bar, the thermos, the bus. She worked the serving line with the same blank reliability she'd maintained for 14 months. She did not look at the range building when she passed it. On the 4th day, Kyle Mercer sat down across from her at the loading dock during her 930 break. She hadn't invited him. He sat down with his water bottle and his half-eaten protein bar, like it was something they'd been doing regularly, which it wasn't. "You don't have to be here," she said. "I know. Then why are you?" He thought about that longer than she expected. "Rourke asked me to track your movement schedule." She went still. "I'm telling you," he asked, Kyle said quickly. "Not that I did it." She looked at him. "Why tell me at all?" "Because I watched you handle Carter Aldis in a situation where I would have probably frozen or made it worse. Miss whatever, and because whatever you are, you don't deserve Rourke's version of attention. He broke off a piece of the protein bar, looked at it. He's been calling the contract administration office every day, pushing for a background review that bypasses the standard HR process. Can he do that? He's been here 9 years, and he's good at knowing which administrative levers exist that most people don't know about. Kyle looked up. He found a provision under contractor security review that lets base command request a secondary identity verification when there's a, quote, operational security concern. Mara breathed out slowly through her nose. He's calling the Aldous incident a security concern, she said. He's calling the wrist technique a security concern. The Aldous incident is just the documentation. She set her thermos down on the crate beside her. The loading dock was quiet. The morning supply run had been early, and the next one wasn't until 1,100. A crow on the fence post. Same one, maybe. She'd started to notice the pattern of it. If that review goes through, she said, what happens? They'd bring in an outside contractor security officer. Full identity verification biometrics, military database cross-reference, the works. Kyle paused. If your file's sealed the way I think it is, the biometrics are going to hit a restricted record. And then it's not Rourke's problem anymore. It goes up the chain. She was quiet for a moment. The crow adjusted on the fence post. Why do you think my file's sealed the way you think it is? She asked. Kyle looked at her directly for the first time in the conversation. Because of how you move, he said. How you stood in that corridor with Carter Aldous yelling at you and didn't move a muscle. How you spotted that receiver fracture. How you handled the wrist release. It wasn't a self-defense class move. That was trained response. That was something you've done under stress, enough times that it's in your body, not your head. He paused. My uncle said something about it. Master Chief Mercer. He said the way you picked up those plate fragments off the floor was the first thing that caught him. He said people with certain training backgrounds have a specific way of clearing a space. It's in the hands. Mara looked at her hands. He's wrong, she said. He's also never wrong, Kyle said, which is annoying, but there it is. She picked up her thermos. Break was ending. She stood, and he stood with her, and for a moment they were both looking at the fence line and the base beyond it. Don't track my schedule, she said. I already didn't. Good. She picked up her supply crate. Don't make a habit of sitting on my loading dock either. Probably smart, he agreed. But she caught the ghost of something on his face as she walked back in not quite a smile, more the suppressed version of one, and she thought about what it meant that a 22-year-old trainee with good instincts and a decorated uncle had decided she was worth the complication. She wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. The security review request went through on a Friday. She found out from Commander Hale, who called her into the office at 1,400 with the same quiet efficiency as before. Hale had the paperwork on her desks and the look of someone who had spent the morning on the phone with people above her pay grade. Rourke filed the operational security concern yesterday evening, Hale said. Base Command has approved a secondary contractor review. It's been assigned to a contract security officer from the regional command, arriving Monday. Mara sat in the same chair as before. The parking lot outside the window was the same. The ancient coffee machine was still there. How long does the review take? She asked. Standard process is 48 hours from arrival. Biometric verification, database cross-reference, employment history audit. Hale paused. In your case, I expect the biometric cross-reference will flag within the first hour. And then it goes to regional command. And then it goes above regional command, given the clearance level involved. Hale folded her hands. I made 2 more requests to the classified personnel branch this week. The second one was returned with a response. They're aware of the situation. Someone in that branch is watching the review request, meaning someone above your clearance levels knows Rourke filed. Meaning someone above my clearance level has been notified. Yes. Hale held her gaze. That could go in your favor, or it could accelerate things. I don't have enough visibility into whatever command authority sealed your file to know which. Mara looked at the window. If it accelerates, she said, what happens to my employment here? Hale was quiet for a moment. That depends on what's in the file and what the authority above it decides. My best assessment, given what I've been able to piece together, is that you came here voluntarily, which means someone either approved it or looked the other way. And if that's true, then the review triggering a flag might result in that someone being asked a question they'll want to answer on their own terms. You're saying my best move is to stay visible, stay clean, and wait. I'm saying that as your contracting supervisor, I have no authority to tell you anything else. Hale picked up a pen, set it down. As a person, I'm saying that whoever you are, whatever you were, the way you've conducted yourself here for the past 14 months does not read like someone who's a threat. It reads like someone who's exhausted. She paused. The review starts Monday. Between now and then, nothing changes. Mara nodded. One more thing, Hale said. Rourke's been talking. Not officially. Informally, in the way that spreads conversations in the training facilities, in the instructor's room. He's been suggesting that the receiver incident and the Aldous incident indicate you may have misrepresented your background on your contractor application. I didn't misrepresent anything. I know. Your application is technically accurate. There's nothing false in it. No. But there's also very little true in it, in any meaningful sense. Hale looked at her. The base knows there's something. They don't know what. And that uncertainty is becoming its own kind of pressure. She felt it that afternoon. The cafeteria dynamic had shifted not dramatically, not in any way she could point to as a specific incident, but in the accumulated texture of small things. The kitchen staff who'd been neutral were now slightly quieter around her. A pair of trainees who'd always been the type to make cafeteria worker jokes had stopped making them, which was almost more uncomfortable because it suggested they'd been told something that made the jokes feel inappropriate. Sexuality. The serving line moved with a slightly different energy, people taking their trays with a bit more consideration of where they looked. Rourke walked through at 1,200, mid-service. He didn't stop at her station. He took his food from the other end of the line, sat at the instructor's table with two senior NCOs, and talked for 40 minutes. She could not hear the conversation. She didn't need to. He was running the informal track parallel to the administrative one, building the story that would be in place by the time the security officer arrived Monday and the flag hit. She watched him from the peripheral edge of her attention and served eggs. The worst part was that he wasn't entirely wrong to be suspicious. She had misrepresented herself in every way that mattered. The application was technically clean because the people who had helped her get here had made it technically clean, the thin legal surface of a contractor background over the real one underneath, held together by a classified designation that most people would never be cleared to touch. She wasn't a fraud, but she wasn't what she appeared to be. And the gap between those two things was exactly the size and shape of a lie. She'd known that when she started. She decided it was worth it. She wasn't sure anymore. That evening she drove past the main gate instead of through it. She didn't plan to. She was heading home, the usual route, and something made her slow down as she approached the turn, and then she was past it and driving south on the access road with the base fence on her left and the flat sprawl of low country marsh on her right. The water catching the last of the day's light in long orange strips. She pulled over after a mile. Engine off. The range was audible from here, faintly not active. That was finished for the day, but the echo of it seemed embedded in the landscape, the way certain sounds mark a place even after they stop. She had grown up near a range. Her father's range, on the property outside Billings, Montana, where she and Daniel had grown up, spending Saturday mornings with paper targets and the patient instruction of a man who believed that precision was a form of respect. "You don't point a rifle," he used to say. "You make a decision. The rifle just executes it." She sat in the car for 20 minutes. When she drove home, she took the long route because she wasn't ready to be inside yet, and the moving helped. Saturday was her day off. She spent most of it in her apartment, doing the things that filled days when you were trying not to think laundry, a grocery run, a long walk along the flat stretch of shoreline road 2 miles from her building that she'd found in her second week, and returned to whenever the walls got close. The shore was nothing special. Scraggly grass, brown sand, cold water. She liked it because nobody was there, and the horizon was wide and empty. She walked for an hour and a half, and for about 40 minutes of it, she let herself think about Daniel. Not the mission, not the specific thing that had happened on the ridge above the valley in the operational area. She was not allowed to name even in her own head. Just Daniel, the way he'd been before, the way he laughed at his own jokes a full 3 seconds before the punchline landed, the way he could read wind drift with a confidence that made it look casual. The best spotter she'd ever worked with, the best person she'd known. The fact of his absence was a weight she carried with the same constancy as her own heartbeat, always present, mostly background, occasionally so loud it swallowed everything else. She walked back to her car. She ate a sandwich she'd picked up at a gas station. She sat in the parking area looking at the water. Her phone showed a missed call from a number she recognized a D. C, area code, the same one that had called her twice in the previous 6 months. She'd never answered it. She didn't answer it now. But she looked at the number for a moment before she put the phone face down on the passenger seat. Someone above the clearance wall was paying attention. She drove home and set the alarm for 4:47. Sunday was supposed to be quiet. It wasn't. She got a text at 1,100 from a number she didn't have saved, which turned out to be Kyle Mercer. She didn't know how he'd gotten her number, and she noted that she should be more concerned about that than she was. Rourke's at the base. Admin building. Sunday. She looked at the text for a moment, then typed back. "How do you know?" "I was running the perimeter. Saw his truck." She set the phone down and looked at her kitchen ceiling for a while. Then she typed, "Stop watching his truck." A pause. Then, "You know that's not really the point." She didn't respond. The point the think Kyle was, circling without saying it directly, was that Rourke was working on a Sunday in the admin building, the day before the security review arrived. That was preparation. He was building something. A brief, maybe, or a presentation of evidence, or a conversation with someone in regional command that would position the review before the security officer had even unpacked her bag. She thought about what Hale had said. Stay visible, stay clean, and wait. She was trying. Monday morning came in gray and humid, the kind of weather that flattened everything and made sound carry differently across the base. She came through the gate at 512, and the guard ran her badge without making eye contact, which was either normal or not, and she couldn't tell which. The security review officer was named Agent Patricia Goss. Professionally. Mara didn't see her arrive, but she heard the name through the kitchen partition around 730 from 2 staffers talking about the black government sedan in the administrative parking lot. She served the breakfast line. Pan, tray, repeat. At 920, 10 minutes before her break, Rourke appeared in the cafeteria doorway. He wasn't alone. The man with him wore a civilian suit that didn't quite fit the military environment and carried a slim briefcase and had the look of someone whose job was to reduce complicated human situations to categorical determinations. Behind them was Kyle Mercer, which was strange. Kyle was supposed to be in PT rotation at this hour, and Kyle's expression when he caught Mara's eye was tight with something that was not quite apology and not quite warning. Rourke stopped at the near end of the serving line. Hartwell, he said, loud enough for the cafeteria to hear. Set down what you're doing. She set down the serving spoon. Agent Goss needs to conduct the preliminary identity verification now. You'll come with us. My break isn't until 930, she said. That's not a negotiation. She untied her apron. Around her, the cafeteria had gone to that particular quiet, where people are still talking but at a frequency that suggests they've stopped paying attention to their own conversations and started paying attention to someone else's. I need to inform Commander Hale, she said. Hale's been informed. She folded the apron over the counterhook, took her time with it, not defiant, just methodical. The way she'd been doing everything for 14 months. She followed Rourke and the agent out of the cafeteria. Kyle fell into step behind her. She didn't look back, but she was aware of him there, the particular weight of Simpson placing themselves between something and something else. The administrative building was 3 minutes across the quad. The morning air sat heavy, gray damp against her face. She could see the government sedan in the parking lot. She could see the light in Hale's office window, the shade pulled slightly, which meant Hale was inside and watching. She kept walking. The agent opened the door to the conference room and gestured her in. The room had a table, 4 chairs, a laptop on the table, and a compact biometric reader that she recognized as a model she'd had her own fingerprints run through more than once in a previous life. She sat down. The agent sat across from her, opened the laptop. Rourke stood to the side, arms crossed, with the expression of a man who'd been waiting for a particular moment for weeks. Ms. Hart, Agent Goss said, I'm going to need your right hand for the initial biometric read. Mara looked at the reader. She placed her right hand on it. The machine hummed. The agent watched her screen. The room was quiet, except for the hum and the sound of Rourke's breathing, and somewhere out south side, a drill sergeant starting the morning's first rotation with a sound like a machine that never fully stopped. The machine stopped humming. Agent Goss looked at her screen. Then she looked at Mara, then at Rourke, then back at the screen. Senior Chief, she said, and her voice had changed. Something had gone out of it. The professional briskness, the categorical confidence. I need you to step outside. Rourke's arms uncrossed. I requested this review. I understand. Please step outside. He looked at Mara. She looked back at him with nothing on her face. Now, Senior Chief, Goss said. He left. The room was quieter, with just the two of them. Goss looked at her screen for a long moment. Then she looked at Mara with an expression that had less interrogation in it than it had 30 seconds ago. Ms. Hartwell, she said carefully. I need to make a call before we go any further. I know, Mara said. Goss looked at her for a beat. Is there anything you want to tell me before I do? Mara looked at the biometric reader, at her hand, still resting on it, at the closed door behind which Rourke was standing in the hallway, waiting for the thing he'd been building toward. No, she said. Make your call. Goss picked up her phone. Outside in the hallway, she heard Rourke shift his weight, and she sat in the silence of a room where the walls were about to change, and she breathed through it the only way she knew how, one slow count at a time, the same way she'd breathed on every ridge, and every rooftop, and every hide position, where the only thing she could control was whether her hands stayed steady. They stayed steady. They had always stayed steady. That was the one thing she hadn't been able to leave behind, no matter how far she'd run from who she was, no matter how many granola bars she'd eaten without tasting, and how many mornings she'd measured in 47-minute increments. Her hands had never learned to shake. And she understood, sitting in that room, with Goss murmuring into her phone and Rourke breathing on the other side of the door, that it was that steadiness, the one thing she'd kept, that had given her away. You couldn't be nobody if your hands remembered everything. Goss was on the phone for 6 minutes. Mara counted. Old habit. She sat with her hand still resting on the biometric reader. She hadn't moved it, and Goss hadn't told her to, and she listened to the agent's side of a conversation that was mostly listening. A few affirmatives. One question that Goss asked quietly enough that Mara couldn't catch the words. Then a longer silence, then a yes that carried specific weight of someone has just been told something they didn't expect and is processing it while trying to sound like they aren't. Goss ended the call. She set the phone on the table with the deliberate care of someone who needed a second before she spoke. "Ms. Hartwell," she said, "I've been instructed to suspend the review pending authorization from a command authority that's above my clearance level." "Okay," Mara said, "which means I can't continue the verification process. It also means I can't release any information from the preliminary biometric result to Senior Chief Rourke or to base administration." "I understand." Goss looked at her for a moment. "You've been through this before." It wasn't a question. "I know how the process works," Mara said. Goss closed the laptop. She unplugged the biometric reader and put it in her briefcase with the efficient movements of someone whose job had just been taken out of her hands and who was professional enough not to show how much that bothered her. "You're free to return to your duties," she said. "I'd recommend staying on base today." Mara stood. "What happens with Rourke?" "That's above my current authority to determine." Goss paused with the briefcase clasp in her hand. "But he's going to know the review was suspended. And going to know the reason isn't something I'm permitted to share with him." "Which tells him something." "Yes," Goss said. "It does." Mara walked to the door. She put her hand on the knob and stopped. "Agent Goss," she said, "the call you made, the person you spoke to, did they say anything about timeline?" Goss considered the question carefully. "They said someone would be in contact with base command within 48 hours. She paused. "I think you probably know what that means better than I do." Mara opened the door. Rourke was in the hallway. He'd been standing close enough to the door that he had to step back when it swung open. And so there was something almost satisfying about the half-second of rearrangement. He had to do the practiced authority of his posture reasserting itself a beat too late. "Well," he said. "The review's been suspended," Mara said. His expression moved through surprise and landed on suspicion. "Suspended. You'd have to speak with Agent Goss about the details." She walked past him toward the building exit. Behind her, she heard him say something to Goss in a tone that was sharper than it should have been, with a federal contractor security officer, and heard Goss's response, calm, brief, the verbal equivalent of a door closing. The morning's air outside was still, gray, and heavy. She crossed the quad and went back to the cafeteria and picked up her apron from the counter hook where she'd left it and tied it back on. The kitchen staffer nearest her pretended to be very busy with the steam table. She picked up the serving spoon and went back to work. By 1300, the base had the story, not the real story, that was still locked behind a clearance wall and a suspended review and a phone call Goss wouldn't discuss. But the shape of the story had spread the way these things always do on a closed installation, through the spaces between official information, carried in fragments by people who'd seen pieces of it and assembled them into something that was approximately true in outline and wrong in almost every specific. What people knew, the security review had been triggered by Rourke, conducted by an outside agent, and shut down by someone above regional command. What people said, the cafeteria contractor had a classified file that even the security reviewer couldn't open. What people speculated, that she was former military, or a federal operative, or something else that nobody could quite name, but that made the receiver fracture and the wrist release and the three cohere into a shape that nobody had seen because nobody had been looking. She heard it in fragments throughout the afternoon, felt it in the different quality of attention in the cafeteria, the way the trainees moved around her with slightly more consideration of space. One of the junior instructors, a man she'd seen Rourke eat lunch with regularly, came through the dinner line and looked at her directly for the first time in 3 months, which was the most telling thing of all. Rourke himself didn't appear in the cafeteria at dinner. She heard from a kitchen staffer that he'd spent the afternoon in a closed meeting with base administration. She could imagine the shape of that meeting, Rourke pushing administration, giving ground carefully because they didn't know what they were dealing with, and the suspended review had told them, unmistakably, that they were dealing with something. That evening, Owen Mercer was sitting on the front steps of the training facility when she crossed the quad toward the contractor exit. He didn't look up from the tablet in his hands. She could tell from the angle of his head that he'd seen her coming from 30 yards out. She stopped 2 feet from the steps. Master Chief. Hartwell. He still didn't look up. How was your day? Productive, she said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. Suspended review. That's a first for this base, far as I know. Now he looked up. His expression was the same one he'd had in the cafeteria, the morning of the plates, not hostile, not warm, just very attentive. Goss left at 1400. She looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her assignment. I wouldn't know about that. Sure. He set the tablet down on his knee. Word I'm hearing from administration is that someone above the regional command authority flagged the review before Goss could complete it. That kind of response time means whoever flagged it was already watching. Farah said nothing, which means, Mercer continued, that whatever's in your file may someone with significant authority has an active interest in your situation here, and that person didn't intervene to arrest you or extract you. They intervened to preserve your cover. He paused. Which means your cover has value to someone. Master Chief, I'm a cafeteria contractor. Yeah. He picked up the tablet again. You're also someone who identified a receiver fracture from a hallway, conducted a trained wrist release on a senator's son, and sat in that conference room this morning without a visible change in breathing or effect while a federal agent ran your biometrics. He looked at the tablet. I've trained operators for 26 years. Some of them had about half of what you just showed in that room. The quad was quiet around them. A group of trainees ran the far perimeter path in the deepening gray of late afternoon. The range was silent. I'm asking you directly, Mercer said. Not to report you, not to break your cover, just as someone who has a responsibility for the people on this base. He looked at her. Are you a threat to this installation? She held his gaze. No, she said. He studied her for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded once and looked back at his tablet. Rourke's not going to stop, he said. The suspended review made it worse. He's the type that reads a wall and decides it's a challenge instead of a boundary. He swiped something on the tablet. He's been talking to administration about requesting a formal skills evaluation under the contractor security protocol. He's framing it as a safety concern. The argument being that if you have undisclosed physical training, the base has a liability exposure. Can he do that? He can file the request. Whether base command approves it is another question. Mercer was quiet for a moment. But it's harder to block than the identity review. The identity review is about information. A skills evaluation is operational. It's an observable test, not a file. There's no clearance wall around watching someone stand on a range. Mara felt the shape of what was coming before he finished the sentence. He'd put you on a range, she said. He'd put you on a range in front of the whole base, Mercer said. That's the point. He doesn't just want to know who you are. He wants to make the revelation public. He wants the audience. She looked at the training facility behind him. The lights in the windows. The flag above the entrance barely moving in the flat afternoon air. And if I refuse? Refusal is grounds for employment termination under the contractor's security clause. He paused. I looked it up this morning. Rourke did too. The trainee group finished their perimeter run and disappeared around the far building. The base settled into its late afternoon. Register quieter, still purposeful. The machinery of it continuing on its own momentum. When? She asked. Request went to administration this afternoon. Commander Hale has until tomorrow morning to approve or deny. He looked at her steadily. I think she'll deny it. But But Rourke will appeal to Base Command directly. And Base Command doesn't have Commander Hale's read on the situation. He picked up his tablet and stood. I think you have about 36 hours before this becomes something you can't walk away from. He went inside. She stood on the steps for a moment in the gray afternoon, and then she walked to her car and drove home and sat in her apartment without turning on the lights, and thought about what 36 hours meant and whether there was a version of it where she came out the other side, still intact. She didn't find one. Hale denied the request at 7:30 Tuesday morning. By 900, Rourke had gone over her head. By 1,100, Base Command had approved a modified version framed not as a skills evaluation but as a mandatory contractor safeties assessment, which was a different clause in the same document, and which Hale apparently could not block at the Base Command level. Mara heard about it at 1,130 during the mid-service lull, when Hale came into the cafeteria in person, which she had never done before, and found Mara at the beverage station, and said quietly, "It's been approved. 1,400 today. Main range." Mara set down the coffee urn. "Commander," I pushed back as far as I could. Hale's voice was even but tight at the edges. "Base Command is framing it as procedural. You're not required to perform at any particular standard officially. You're just required to demonstrate basic firearm safety competency as part of the contractor security protocol." She paused. "That's the official framing. And the actual framing. Rourke has invited every senior instructor and half the training cohort to observe." Hale looked at her directly. "He's built an audience. He wants this to be the moment." Mara was quiet. "You have the option to refuse," Hale said. "It triggers termination of contract, but it stops the public evaluation." "And if I refuse, does the story stop?" Hale said nothing, which was the answer. "If I refuse," Mara said, "Rourke files the suspension, tells the story his way, and there's no counter-narrative. Whatever he's built in the last 2 weeks is the version that stays." She picked up the coffee urn. "If I go, at least I'm there. Mara." Hale said her first name for the first time in 14 months. "Whatever you decide, be careful about how much you reveal. Once something is visible, it's permanent." Mara thought about that for a moment. "I know," she said. "The main range at Redstone ran 400 meters on its primary lane, with a secondary setup capable of extending to 800 for advanced qualification. It had a covered firing line with 20 stations, a spotting station to the right, and elevated observation for instructors along the left side. It was a working range, not a showpiece, with the accumulated grime of thousands of training cycles on every surface. By 1,350, it was crowded. She hadn't expected the number 24 trainees in the observation area, 6 senior instructors, a pair of admin officers who had no operational reason to be there except the same reason everyone else was. Rourke stood at the center of the firing line with the particular posture of a man who had arranged something and was pleased with the arrangement. Lieutenant Cross was there too, standing slightly apart from Rourke's group, her expression doing the complicated thing it did when she was trying to look neutral. Kyle Mercer was in the trainee group. He caught her eye when she walked in and gave nothing away, but his jaw was set. Ofen Mercer stood at the observation rail with his arms behind his back and his face in the configuration she'd come to recognize as maximum attention behind minimum expression. She walked to the firing line. She was still in her cafeteria uniform gray shirt, contractor badge. She hadn't changed because there hadn't been time, because changing would have felt like an admission of something she wasn't ready to admit. Rourke looked at her the way a man looks at something he's been waiting to open. "Hartwell," he said. "Welcome to the range. Senior Chief." He gestured at the weapons table to the right of the firing line. 2 M18 service pistols, an M4 rifle, and a bolt action that she recognized as a Mark 13 Mod 7, a sniper platform that had no business being at a contractor safety assessment, and whose presence here was a statement, not an accident. "Standard safety assessment," Rourke said, loud enough for the observation area. We'll start with the service pistol. Basic familiarization. Loading. Safety check. 10 rounds at a standard silhouette. 25 meters. He paused. For safety purposes, the observation area was quiet in the way that meant people were very specifically listening. She picked up the M18, ran a chamber check, clean, empty. She picked up the magazine, seated it, racked the slide. The movements were automatic, and she let them be automatic, because trying to make them look unfamiliar would be worse than not trying. Rourke noticed. She saw it in the slight shift of his expression. She stepped to the firing line. The silhouette target at 25 meters was the standard B-27, a large format black outline of a human torso. She'd shot this target profile hundreds of times, in every condition from clean ranges to positions that had no name in any manual. She raised the pistol, and then she made a decision. She shot like someone who'd had basic firearms training and not much else. Not badly enough to be implausible, a cafeteria contractor who'd claimed zero experience would be obviously lying with the chamber check she'd already run, but within the pattern of someone competent, not exceptional. Center mass hits, 8 of 10, 2, slightly outside the optimal zone. Acceptable. Unremarkable. She set the pistol down. The observation area was quiet. Someone murmured something she couldn't hear. Rourke walked to the target, looked at it, came back. His expression had recalibrated. He'd expected either obvious incompetence or obvious capability, and he'd gotten something in between that he didn't know what to do with. The rifle, he said. She moved to the M4. Same process chamber check, magazine load. She stepped to the line. The target had been moved to 100 meters, which was the standard rifle qualification distance. She shot the 10-round assessment. Kept the same register competent, controlled, not exceptional. The grouping was tight enough to be credible, but not so tight that it required explanation. Rourke examined the target, came back. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was working something out. The bolt gun, he said. She looked at the Mark 13 on the table. Then at Rourke. That's not a standard safety assessment platform, she said. It's been added to the assessment. Base command authorization. He held out the printed amendment. She didn't take it. She could read it from where she stood. She looked at the rifle, at the range extending beyond the standard firing line. The range officer was setting a new target. She tracked the movement and calculated distance without meaning to, somewhere between 600 and 700 meters. The target was small, smaller than standard. Targets at 650, Rourke said. 2 rounds for grouping. The observation area had gone very still. She stood at the table and looked at the Mark 13 and thought about the last time she'd been behind a rifle like this, and who had been beside her, and what had happened afterward, and the 14 months of granola bars and 7 bars and 447 alarms that she'd built to put distance between herself and that moment. 650 meters. She picked up the rifle. It was heavier than she'd let herself remember. Not physically, the Mark 13 was a manageable platform, 8.2 kilograms with the optic. But the weight of the thing in her hands was not really about kilograms. She brought it to the line. She adjusted the bipod by feel, positioned herself behind the optic, and let herself go through the preliminary sequence the way she'd been trained: natural point of aim, bone support, respiratory pause, the whole architecture of a shot that begins long before the trigger. She exhaled. She fired once. The shot cracked out across the range, and the observation area held its breath, and the range officer at the spotting scope said nothing for a long 3 seconds. Miss Rourke said, satisfied. Try again. She adjusted. One small correction. She breathed. She squeezed. The second shot cracked. The range officer didn't say miss. He didn't say anything. He was still professionally. He was still looking through the spotting scope, and his silence had a different quality than it should have. Well, Rourke said, it's a hit, Senior Chief. Where? Another pause. Dead center of the scoring zone. The observation area released something not quite a sound, more the absence of held breath. Rourke's expression tightened. 2 rounds isn't a grouping. She missed the first. With respect, Senior Chief. The range officer lifted his head from the spotting scope. The first round also hit the target. Rourke went still. Where? Same scoring zone, 2 centimeters apart. The observation area was completely quiet now. Not the quiet of boredom or inattention, the quiet of 30 people recalibrating something. She missed, Rourke said. You heard the shot. The round was on target. The range officer had the careful voice of someone who was being precise, because being precise was the only way to stay clear of what was happening in this room. Both rounds, Senior Chief, 650 meters. 2-centimeter grouping. Rourke looked at Mara. She was still behind the optic. She hadn't moved. Her breathing was the same as it had been before the first shot. She stood up. Rourke stepped toward the table. That's impossible at this range without training certification. The wind was 4 knots left at origin, dropped to 2 at mid-range. There's a right offset thermal from the facility wall. You account for it. She heard herself say it before she decided to. Flat, automatic, the way she talked on a range. Rourke's face was doing something complicated. In his peripheral space, she could see Owen Mercer at the observation rail, and he was very still in the way of someone who has just had a thing confirmed that they already knew. Again, Rourke said, Senior Chief, the range officer started. Again, push the target to 800. That's outside the assessment protocols. Push it to 800 meters and give her the rifle. The observation area held. Nobody spoke. The range officer looked to the observation rail. Looked, she registered, at Owen Mercer, who gave a small nod. The target was moved. She stood at the line with the rifle in her hands and 800 meters of afternoon air in front of her, and she understood that the decision she'd made when she picked up the M18 to keep herself hidden, to shoot within the narrow band of competent, unremarkable, was no longer available to her. Rourke had pushed past it, and she could shoot badly at 800, and it would be obvious. Or she could shoot the way she actually shot, and it would be obvious in a different way. She had run out of the space between those 2 options. She thought about 14 months. She thought about the alarm at 4:47, and the granola bar, and the thermos, and the bus. She thought about the loading dock, and the crow on the fence post, and the 40 minutes on the shore where she let herself think about Daniel. She got behind the rifle, 800 meters. The wind had slightly. In the last 3 minutes, she felt it before she read it, a degree of change in the pressure on her left cheek. She ran the calculation. Range, wind at origin, wind at mid-range, temperature, the mild left cant of the range terrain that introduced a ballistic drift most people didn't know to account for. She adjusted the scope by 2 clicks, felt the position settle. She breathed. She didn't think about Daniel. She tried not to. She focused on the fundamental things: point of aim, trigger pressure, the architecture of the shot, and she almost made it. Almost. She fired. The range officer was at the spotting scope, before the sound finished rolling back from the berm. 4 seconds of silence. 5. Scoring zone, he said. His voice had changed. Edge of center. He paused. That's Senior Chief. That's inside the qualification. Standard for advanced certification. Rourke's jaw moved. Again, he said, Senior Chief, the assessment protocols. I said again. She fired a second round. She already knew where it would land. She'd known before she pulled the trigger because the position was right and the wind was accounted for and the calculation was complete, and her hands were, as they had always been, exactly steady. Same point of impact, the range officer said. He was no longer even trying to keep the tone out of his voice. 2 rounds, substantially sub-MOA at 800 meters. The observation area had gone to a kind of silence she'd heard, before the silence of people who have just seen something that doesn't fit any category they have ready, and who are waiting for someone to tell them what category to use. Rourke walked to her. He was Closer than he needed to be, using proximity as authority the way he always did. The trick that worked on people who were smaller or less trained or more uncertain than they appeared. She stayed where she was. She let him stand close because moving back would be a tell, and she was done giving tells. "Who are you?" he said, quietly. No audience performance in it this time. Just the actual question. She looked at him. She thought about saying, "I'm the cafeteria contractor." She didn't. She said nothing. His hand moved quick, sharp, with the specific decision of someone who has been thwarted repeatedly and has decided that a visible, undeniable confrontation is the only move he has left. He grabbed the collar of her uniform shirt. Not violent. Not a strike. A grip the kind that says, "I will make you visible whether you want to be or not," and he pulled. The fabric tore at the collar. She let it. She didn't stop him. Because stopping him would have required a choice she wasn't sure she'd made yet. The torn collar exposed the left side of her neck and upper chest. The tattoo. She'd had it for 11 years. A naval special warfare insignia, the eagle, trident, pistol, and anchor, with the modification below it that was not standard issue. That was given only in a specific operational context that fewer than 60 people in the country had ever achieved. A pair of crossed hairs in a circle, the mark of the program she'd graduated from at 23 and carried in her skin ever since. The observation area saw it. Every instructor, every trainee. Kyle Mercer, who went very still, the admin officers who looked at each other. Lieutenant Cross, whose expression broke for the first time since Mara had known her. Owen Mercer at the observation rail, who closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, and whose face said that he had known for a while, and that knowing it and seeing it were two different things. Rourke stared at the tattoo. He released her collar. The fabric stayed torn. She made no move to cover it. And then Commander Victoria Hale walked through the range entrance she'd arrived in the last 90 seconds, had been standing at the back of the observation area, and had seen on the collar tier, and her voice, when she spoke, cut across the range with the clean, flat authority of someone who has spent a career deciding when to be gentle and when to be absolute. "Everyone stand down," she said. "Senior Chief Rourke, you're relieved from this range." Now, Rourke turned. "Commander, I have command authorizations." "You had authorization for a contractor safety assessment. What you just conducted is something else." She walked forward, and the observation area parted for her with the instinct of people who recognize that the authority in the room has just shifted. She stopped between Rourke and Mara. "Walk off my range." Rourke looked at Hale, at the tattoo, at the 2-centimeter grouping still on a target 800 meters away. He walked off the range. Hale turned to the observation area, trainees, instructors, admin officers, all of them. "Training is done for the day," she said. "Everyone clear out." They cleared out. Kyle Mercer was the last to go, and he paused at the range entrance for a moment, looking back at Mara with an expression that had nothing simple in it. Then it was Hale and Mercer and Mara, and the range and the two holes in a target 800 meters away. Hale looked at Mara, at the torn collar, at the tattoo. "Someone from the classified personnel branch is arriving tomorrow morning," she said. "They called while you were on the range." A pause. "I think you know what that means." Mara looked at the Mark 13, still on the table in front of her. "It means it's over," she said. "The hiding part," Hale said. "Yes." Owen Mercer said nothing. He had moved to the firing line and was standing at the position she'd shot from, looking downrange at the target. She could see him working through the calculation, the distance, the wind. Unusance, the wind, the grouping running it, the way an experienced man runs something he needs to verify, even when he already knows the answer. He turned around. "Petty Officer Hartwell," he said. The rank. Her rank. The one nobody on this base had said aloud in 14 months. She felt it land somewhere in her chest with the specific weight of a thing you've been holding under the surface. "Finally breaking through." She said nothing. He nodded, once, with the kind of respect that doesn't require anything added to it. Then he walked off the range too, and left her standing there alone with the rifle and the torn collar and the 800 meters of afternoon air and the 2 holes in the target that had just ended the longest 14 months of her life. The crow landed on the range fence. It looked at her. She looked back. After a while, she set the rifle down, pressed the torn fabric back over the tattoo with one hand, and stood in the silence of everything that had just become impossible to put back. Her hands were steady. They had always been steady. And she was beginning to understand, standing on that range, in that silence, that this was not the ending of something. It was the moment just before something else began, and she had no idea yet whether she was ready for it. But her hands were steady, and she was still standing. That was where she always started. She stayed on the range for 11 minutes after Mercer left. Nobody came back for her. Hale had given her that at least the space to stand there without anyone trying to manage what came next. She appreciated it in the way you appreciate things that cost someone something to give. The crow left the fence post. The afternoon light moved in the slow way it does in late autumn, going amber at the edges before anyone's ready for it. She picked up the Mark 13 from the table, cleared it properly, bolt back, chamber check, magazine removed, safety confirmed, and set it back down in the exact position she'd found it. Not because anyone was watching, because that was how you handled a weapon when you were done with it. She touched the torn collar once, pressing the fabric back against her chest. Then she dropped her hand. It didn't matter. Everyone had already seen. She walked off the range and across the quad in the direction of the administrative building, because that was where this was going to happen, and waiting for it to come to her had never been something she was good at. Hale's office had 3 people in it when Mara knocked and entered. Hale behind the desk. Owen Mercer in the chair to the right, the one Mara had never seen occupied before. And a third person, she didn't know, a man in his late 50s, civilian clothes that were too well pressed for someone who'd traveled, which meant he'd arrived ahead of the range assessment and had been here waiting. He had a government ID badge clipped to his jacket pocket and the particular stillness of someone accustomed to rooms where things get decided. He looked at her the way she imagined. She looked at everything assessment first, expression second. "Close the door," Hale said. Mara closed it. "Sit down," the man said. She looked at him. "I don't know who you are. My name is Raymond Carr. I'm with the Special Operations Personnel Management Branch, DODD. He said it without emphasis, the way you say something that is simply true. "I've been managing your file for 22 months. She sat down in the remaining chair. Carr folded his hands on the folder he'd brought. "You've had a complicated afternoon." "I've had a complicated 14 months, she said. "Fair." He opened the folder. "I'm going to tell you what happens now, and then I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we're going to have a conversation about what comes next." In that order. He looked at her. "Is that acceptable?" "Yes. Senior Chief Rourke will be formally relieved of his training duties pending a conduct review. The review will cover the security review manipulation, the unauthorized escalation of the skills assessment, and the physical contact on the range." He turned a page. "That last one is the one that matters legally. He grabbed your uniform and tore it. That's documented, witnessed by approximately 30 people, and there's no administrative framing that makes it acceptable." "He wanted the tattoo visible," she said. "He got what he wanted," Carr said. "And he'll pay for the method he used to get it." Hale was watching from behind her desk with the expression of someone listening very carefully to the spaces between the official language. "What about the rest of it?" Mara said. "The base knows what they saw." "Yes," Carr said. "They do. And we're not going to try to manage that, because managing it would require a level of information suppression that's both impractical and unnecessary. What they saw was a contractor demonstrating exceptional marksmanship under pressure. The interpretation of that depends on what we tell them. And what are you going to tell them?" Carr looked at her for a moment. "That depends on you." She held his gaze. "Say that plainly." "You came here voluntarily. he said. The arrangement was approved at a command level above this installation, specifically because someone with your background choosing to step away from operational duty was considered preferable to the alternative. He paused. The alternative being that you were in a state that made continued deployment inadvisable. The room was quiet. Outside, she could hear the base continuing its work, distant voices, a vehicle engine, the ordinary percussion of a military installation running its routines. You're saying I was flagged as unfit, she said. I'm saying that 11 months after the Comdesh operation, your psychological evaluation indicated that you were not in a position to function effectively in an operational role. He said it without apology, which she respected more than gentleness would have been. You disagreed with that assessment. You left before a formal determination could be made. The arrangement here was the compromise. Owen Mercer, who had been silent since she entered, spoke. What was Comdesh? Carr looked at him. He'll need to know, Mara said. If you're going to tell me what comes next, he'll need to know. Carr considered this. Then he looked at Mercer. 26 months ago, Petty's officer, Hartwell was the primary shooter on a 3-person Overwatch element supporting a hostage recovery operation in a location I'm not going to name. The operation was compromised at the extraction point. The 2-person support element was hit. He stopped. Mara picked it up, because it was hers to say, not his. My brother was my spotter, she said. Daniel Hartwell. He covered my position when the support element was overrun. He was killed. She kept her voice level. She'd practiced this, not the saying of it, but the breathing through it while saying it. I completed the shot sequence. 12 personnel were extracted successfully. I was recovered with 2 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a through and through in my left shoulder. She paused. I finished the shot sequence before I went down. The room absorbed that. Mercer was looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man who has heard many difficult things in 26 years of service and has learned not to perform a reaction, but for whom the absence of performance is itself visible. The psychological evaluation afterward, Carr said carefully, indicated severe grief response complicated by operational trauma. The recommendation was extended non-operational status and structured support. The recommendation was that I sit in a room and talk to someone while Daniel was dead, Mara said. Her voice stayed level. I understand why they made it. I wasn't able to accept it at the time. So you ran, Mercer said. Not an accusation. I found a cafeteria job on a naval training base, she said, which is a specific kind of running. Something moved in Mercer's expression. Not quite a smile. The thing adjacent to one, in someone who doesn't smile easily. Carr turned another page in the folder. The question in front of us is what happens from here. The question in front of you, Mara said. I'm still working on my question. What's yours? She looked at the window, the parking lot, the fence line, and the base beyond it. And the base beyond it, whether I came here to disappear, she said, or whether I came here because this is the only place that made sense and I just hadn't figured out what to do with it yet. Carr waited. I don't have an answer to that, she said. I thought I did this morning. I don't anymore. The formal debrief lasted 2 hours. Carr walked her through it with the methodical patience of someone who had done this before, not a trauma debrief, not a psych evaluation, but the operational kind, the reconstruction of a timeline. How she'd arrived at Redstone, what she'd done for 14 months, and why each decision had been made. The receiver incident, the Aldous incident, the review, and the range. Hale stayed for most of it. Mercer stayed for all of it. When it was done, Carr closed the folder. Rourke's conduct review starts tomorrow, he said. You'll be asked to provide a statement. Keep it to the observable facts, what he did and when. Don't characterize. Just describe. Understood. Kyle Mercer will also receive a conduct review for the period in which Rourke asked him to monitor your movements. Rourke asked, Kyle declined. The record should reflect that accurately. It should, she agreed. Carr stood, picked up the folder. Your contract employment here is technically in suspension pending resolution of the security review. Practically, nobody from this office is going to push for termination. He looked at her. What happens to the contract long term is going to depend on a conversation I need to have with people above me. It may take a few days, I understand. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, petty officer, what you did on that range this afternoon was not what I would have recommended. But I understand why it happened. He opened the door. And for the record, the psych evaluation from 22 months ago was accurate. The part they got wrong was the conclusion. She looked at him. What do you mean? They concluded non-operational status. The accurate read was that you needed time. Those are different things. He held her gaze for a moment. Some of the best people I've worked with needed time. The ones who didn't turn out to be the ones I worried about. He left. The door closed. Hale let the quiet sit for a moment, then looked at Mara. You should go home. Sleep. Come back tomorrow and give Carr's office the statement they need. And after that, we figure out what this looks like going forward. Mara stood. She was aware of how tired she was, in a way she hadn't let herself be during the debrief, the specific fatigue that comes not from physical exertion, but from holding something at a controlled level for hours and then releasing the control. At the door, she stopped. Commander, the day you pulled my file and hit the clearance wall, you could have just reported it upward and let it process through. Most people would have. Hale looked at her steadily. Most people didn't watch you pick up plate fragments with steady hands while 30 people laughed at you. Mara nodded once, went out. The next 48 hours moved in a different register than anything in the previous 14 months. The base knew. Not everything the operational details of Comdesh were classified far above anyone at Redstone, but the shape of it. The tattoo. The grouping at 800 meters. The fact that the security review had been suspended by a DoD personnel branch that most of them had never heard of. The word that moved through the installation was careful, and a little uncertain the way language gets when people are revising a story they'd already finished telling themselves. She heard versions of it in the kitchen. The staffers who'd been treating her like furniture for 14 months, suddenly uncertain about what register to use. She heard it in the way trainees moved through the serving line. Less performance, more consideration. She heard it in the silence where Rourke's commentary used to be. And she gave the conduct statement to Carr's office on Wednesday morning. 3 pages, factual, chronological. What he did when, who was present. She did not characterize. The conduct review for Rourke was confirmed that afternoon. Senior Chief Derek Rourke was formally relieved of training duties and placed on administrative hold pending investigation. She heard about it through Hale's office. She didn't feel satisfaction about it. She felt the absence of something that had been generating friction for weeks, which was quieter and more complicated than satisfaction. Kyle Mercer found her on the loading dock Thursday morning. He sat on the milk crate without asking. Like he'd decided that was his spot now. The review cleared me, he said. The part about Rourke asking me to track you. On the record, it's noted that I declined and reported it. Good. I should have told you sooner that he asked. She looked at him. You told me the same day I needed to know. Still, he turned the water bottle in his hands. I've been thinking about the range. The second assessment at 800 meters. You didn't want to do it. No, but you could have refused. You had grounds it was outside the assessment protocol. I had grounds, she agreed. So why didn't you? She thought about how to answer that honestly. Because refusing would have meant letting Rourke write the ending. And I was tired of letting other people decide what my story meant. Kyle was quiet with that for a moment. The mark below the trident, he said. The crossed hairs. I looked it up. I couldn't find what program it corresponds to. You won't. My uncle knew what it was. I could tell by the way he looked at it. Your uncle has 26 years, she said. He's earned the knowing. Kyle nodded slowly. He said something to me last night. He said, some people carry so much weight that what looks like stillness is actually just maximum load bearing. He said, you should never mistake that for peace. She looked at the fence line. He's not wrong, she said. Kyle stood. He lingered a beat. She had the impression he wanted to say something else, something in the register of the personal rather than the operational, and was deciding against it. For what it's worth, he said, the people who laughed in the cafeteria, that first day, I don't think any of them know how to feel about it now. They don't need to feel any particular way about it, she said. Maybe. He capped the water bottle. But I think some of them will remember it for a long time. What it means to be wrong about someone that completely. He jogged back toward the training facility. The crow landed on the post. She drank her coffee. Carr came back Friday morning with the answer from above his level. He sat across from her in Hale's office with his folder and his well-pressed civilian clothes and told her, in the direct way she'd come to expect from him, what the people above him had decided. Your contractor status will be formally reinstated, he said, with a modification to your employment category. You'll move from cafeteria services to a training support role, specifically working with the marksmanship and tactics program under Master Chief Mercer's oversight. He paused. It's not a commissioned role. It's not a return to operational status. It's a lateral move within the same installation. She looked at the window, the parking lot, the same sedans. And if I don't want that, she said, then your contractor contract concludes with appropriate severance, your file returns to sealed status, and you go wherever you go next. He held her gaze. Nobody is ordering you to stay, but somebody thinks I should. Somebody thinks that what you demonstrated on that range represents a capability that this training program could use. And somebody thinks that staying here in a structured role with consistent work and people around you who now know enough to not require you to hide might be better for you than whatever comes next if you leave. He set down the folder. That's the recommendation. The decision is yours. She sat with it. Master Chief Mercer knows about this offer, she asked. He proposed it, Hale said. She looked at Hale. He came to me Thursday morning, Hale said, before Carr arrived. He said, and I'm quoting, because he was specific, she's been doing the right thing in the wrong job for 14 months. Fix the job. Outside, the base was running its 800 cycle. She could hear it through the window, the rhythm of it, commands and movement, and the particular sound of people being shaped towards something. She had spent 14 months hearing it as background. She was aware that she was, for the first time, hearing it differently. There's a trainee, she said, Rodriguez, Maya Rodriguez. Second cohort, about 3 weeks in. Hale and Carr exchanged a brief look. I know who she is, Hale said. She's struggling with the qual standards. Not the physical, the precision work. She shoots like someone who hasn't been taught how to breathe yet. She paused. Someone with the right kind of patience could help her. Is that a yes? Carr asked. She looked at her hands on the table. The butterfly closures from the plate fragments were gone now, healed, barely scarred. The calluses were still there, the thumb with the reconstructed joint. The stretchiness that 14 months of cafeteria work hadn't touched. It's a yes, she said. She found Maya Rodriguez on the qual range Saturday morning. Range was open for individual practice on weekends, and Rodriguez was there alone in the early cold, working through a pistol qualification sequence with the focused misery of someone who knows they're doing something wrong and can't find the specific thing. She shot a string of 10, checked the target, and made a sound under her breath that was mostly frustration. Mara stood at the entrance to the range for a moment, watching. Rodriguez was young, 20, maybe 21, with the build of someone who'd worked physical jobs before the military, and the posture of someone trying to present more confidence than she felt. Her grip on the pistol was slightly too tight. Her breathing wasn't timed to the trigger press. She was fighting the weapon instead of working with it. Mara walked to the adjacent lane. Rodriguez looked over. Her expression moved through several things: fast recognition, uncertainty, the residue of having been in the observation area on Tuesday and not knowing what to do with what she'd seen. I heard you're in training support now, Rodriguez said. Starting Monday. Today I'm just here. She picked up the range's loaner pistol from the station table and checked it. That grip is costing you 2 centimeters on every shot to the right. Rodriguez looked at her pistol. My grip. Too much tension in the third and fourth fingers. You're anticipating the recoil before it happens. The tension throws the muzzle right microseconds before the round breaks. I've been working on this for 3 weeks. I know. And you've gotten more consistent, which means the bad habit is more consistent, too. She stepped to the line. Watch. She fired 3 rounds, slow and deliberate, calling each one before she fired. Center. Center. Half-inch right. She set the pistol down. Now you. Rodriguez fired 3 rounds, looked at the target. Right, because you're holding the same tension. Mara stepped behind her, not touching, just positioning. Loosen the ring and pinky finger. Just those 2. Index and middle finger do the work. That feels wrong. It feels unfamiliar. Different thing. Rodriguez adjusted. Fired 3 rounds. The group walked left of where it had been still not center, but the direction of the correction. There, Mara said. Rodriguez looked at the target. Then back at her. That actually moved. It'll take 200 more rounds before it's automatic. But you found the problem. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. She ejected the magazine and started the reload the way she'd been taught. Smooth, practiced. Her physical fundamentals were solid. Just the one bad habit layered on top. Can I ask you something? Rodriguez said. Depends on what it is. On the range Tuesday. When you fired the second string at 800 meters, she pressed the magazine home. Were you scared? Mara looked downrange at the silhouette target at 25 meters. A simple target, the simplest kind. Yes, she said. Rodriguez looked at her. Of missing? Of not missing. Rodriguez didn't understand that immediately. Mara watched her work through it, the slight furrow, the moment of real consideration. Because if you didn't miss, Rodriguez started. Then everything I'd been for 14 months was over. And whatever came next, I didn't have a plan for. Rodriguez nodded slowly, like she was filing it away somewhere useful. How do you fire anyway? She asked. When you're scared like that? Mara thought about it. The honest answer. You don't fix the fear, she said. You get your breathing right and you make the decision, and the fear is just something that's also present. It doesn't get a vote on the outcome. She picked up the range pistol. 40 more rounds. Focus on the grip. Rodriguez stepped to the line. She fired, adjusted, fired again. Better. The Conduct Review Board completed its work on the following Tuesday. Senior Chief Derek Rourke received a formal reprimand for manipulation of the contractor security review process, unauthorized escalation of the skills assessment beyond approved protocol, and conduct unbecoming his rank in the physical contact on the range. He was transferred from Redstone to an administrative position at a regional logistics command, not dismissed, because 20 years of service generated institutional inertia even when the conduct was clear but removed. Gone. Kyle Mercer's record was cleared, the notation of Rourke's request, and Kyle's refusal was entered as a commendation for integrity under pressure, which was Mercer's doing Owen. Mercer, who had apparently spent 2 days ensuring that the record said what it needed to say about his nephew. Lieutenant Cross received a formal counseling for the conduct in the cafeteria, the deliberately public dismissiveness over the was lesser because it was lesser, but it was on the record. Cross came to find Mara on the loading dock the afternoon the reviews were finalized. She stood at the dock entrance and didn't sit. I owe you an apology, Cross said. You gave me a warning about Rourke's reach, Mara said. That was something. I also made your life harder in the cafeteria for 3 weeks. You did. Cross looked at the fence line. She had the expression of someone who was doing a thing they decided to do and was not finding it comfortable. I didn't like that. I couldn't read you, she said. That's the honest reason. You didn't fit, and I didn't know why, and instead of leaving it alone, I picked at it. She paused. That's not a justification. No, Mara said. It's not. Cross nodded. Something settled in her expression, not relief. Exactly. The thing that comes from saying an honest thing out loud. I hear you're working the marksmanship program, she said. Monday. Rodriguez is in my tactics section. She's been struggling. I know. She's working on it. Cross looked at her for a beat. You're good with her. I was her once. A different range, different weapon. But the same problem. She picked up her coffee from the milk crate. Took someone patient to find it. Cross left without more ceremony, which was the right call. Sunday evening, Mara drove past the base main gate and kept driving south on the access road the way she'd done once before, and pulled over at the same spot with the marsh on her right and the fence on her left. She turned the engine off. The light was going orange again. Same time of day, different week, different version of her situation. She tried to locate the difference and found it was harder to name than she expected, not because nothing had changed, but because the change was internal, which is always harder to measure than the external kind. She thought about Daniel. She let herself think about him fully, this time, without the fence she usually put around it. The way he'd set up a spotting position, careful, methodical, the same attention to the small things that she'd always had too, which was probably where they'd both gotten it from. The way he'd said, on the last morning before the operation, "You're the best shot I've ever seen, and you know it, so stop pretending you're nervous." She had been nervous. I know, he'd said. I'm nervous too. Do it anyway. She pressed her thumb against the steering wheel and held it there. He wasn't coming back. She'd known that for 26 months, and it had not gotten smaller. It had just changed shape from a sharp thing to a weight, and from a weight to something more like weather, present, and variable, and occasionally severe. She was learning to work in the weather instead of waiting for it to stop. She drove home, set the alarm for 600, not 4:47, because her first day in the new role started at 730, and she didn't need the bus anymore. She made tea instead of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the light on this time. Outside the window, the night was ordinary and quiet, and she sat in it without needing it to be anything else. That was new. It wasn't fixed. It wasn't resolved. There were still mornings that were going to be harder than other mornings. And there was still the weight of the weather that didn't go away on a schedule. But she had stopped running in a forward direction while calling it standing still. And on Monday morning, she was going to walk onto a range with her real name and her real hands and her real history. And she was going to help a 20-year-old trainee learn how to breathe through the fear and make the decision anyway. Her brother had taught her that. It was the least she could do with it. Monday came in clear. Not warm, it was the kind of November morning that had no softness in it, the air sharp and flat and honest about what it was. She drove to base in the dark, arrived at the gate at 645, and the guard ran her badge, the same way he always had. The badge said the same name. The badge said a different role. She parked in the main lot instead of the contractor area. It was a small thing. It shouldn't have felt like anything. It felt like something. The marksmanship range was empty at 700, which was how she'd asked for it. She walked the length of the firing line, checked each station bipods, sandbags, the condition of the bench rests, the target retrieval cables. She noted 2 stations where the lighting was slightly degraded and flagged them on the maintenance sheet she found clipped to the range officer's board. She checked the weapons locker, verified the inventory against the log. All present, all clean. She stood at the far end of the line and looked downrange. 400 meters to the primary berm, 800 to the secondary. The morning light was coming in at a low angle off the east, which would create a specific glare issue at the near-target distances for left-handed shooters. She made a note of that, too. Owen Mercer arrived at 720. He walked the line the same way she had, not inspecting her work, just doing the thing that experienced Earl Shocks officers do every morning, because the discipline of it matters regardless of what the previous check showed. Like, he stopped at the 2 stations she'd flagged. "Good catch," he said. "The fluorescent tube in Station 7 is going. Probably 2 days before it fails completely. I'll have it replaced today." He came to stand at the end of the line beside her, and they looked downrange together in the way of people who share a particular vocabulary about distance and wind and the calculation of small adjustments with large consequences. "First group is in at 0800, he said. 8 trainees. Mixed level some. Strong some who need the fundamentals rebuilt. Rodriguez is in the group. I know. She told you? She's been here every Saturday morning for 3 weeks. I've been watching her work." Mercer was quiet for a moment. "How do you want to run it?" "Individual assessment first. 2 strings of 10 at 25 meters, pistol. I want to see how each of them breathes before I see how they shoot." He looked at her. "Breathing's the diagnostic," she said. "Everything else is downstream of that." Agreed. He turned back to the range. "You'll have full authority over the training sequence. I'll be present but not directing. If I see something, I'll tell you privately, not in front of the group. I appreciate that. It's how I'd want it done if our positions were reversed." He picked up the maintenance clipboard she'd started. "House rules on this range: nobody handles a weapon angry. If someone's frustrated, they step back from the line. Frustration in the hands is a bad habit that outlasts the emotion." My father said the same thing. Mercer looked at her. It was the first personal thing she'd offered voluntarily, and they both knew it. "He shoot?" Mercer asked. "My whole life. He had a range on the property outside Billings. He taught Daniel and me on the same rifle." She paused. "A Remington 700 that probably had no business being in the hands of a 12-year-old. How old were you when you outshot him?" 14. He didn't admit it until I was 17. Something real moved in Mercer's expression. Sounds like a man who knew how to lose gracefully. He knew how to make sure the lesson landed before he gave up the win. Mercer made the sound that was adjacent to a laugh. "I'll be in the observation room if you need me." He walked up the range. She stood at the line alone for a few more minutes, in the clear November morning, breathing the cold air, watching the light change on the distant berm. Then she heard Boots, the group, arriving. 8 trainees coming through the range entrance with their gear, their noise, their varying levels of morning energy. Rodriguez was third through the door, spotted Mara, and gave a small nod that had more in it than it appeared to. Mara turned to face them. "Line up on the stations," she said. "No weapons yet. I want to watch you stand." The morning went the way good. First mornings go not smoothly, but honestly. 2 of the 8 trainees had developed compensating habits that were going to take weeks to correct. One had fundamentals so clean that her job was mostly to stay out of his way. The rest were in the middle range where most people live, teachable, inconsistent, aware that something was off without being able to locate what. Rodriguez was in the teachable range and knew it, which put her ahead of most people. By 1,000, they were at 50 meters with the pistol, and Rodriguez was running strings that were tightening with each rotation. Not fixed, still pulling right when she let the tension creep back into her grip, but catching it faster. Mara watched her recognize the error mid-string once, pause her breathing, reset, and finish the group 3 centimeters closer to center than her opening string. "That," Mara said. Rodriguez looked at the target. "It's still off. The last 3 rounds are tighter than your first 3. You diagnosed it mid-string and corrected. That's not a skill most people develop in 3 weeks. It's still off-center. Yes, and next week, it'll be less off. That's how this works." She stepped back. Again. At the end of the session, she had each trainee fire a final 10-round string, cold, no warm-up, no preparation. Just step to the line and shoot. The way real situations work. None of them were happy about it. Rodriguez's cold string was her worst group of the morning. She came off the line with the look of someone who'd been handed back a test they thought they'd passed. That was worse, Rodriguez said. Your cold string is always worse than your warm string. That's why we practice it. Mara cleared the range pistol and set it on the station. What do you do with that information? Rodriguez thought. Practice cold strings until they're close enough to your warm strings that the difference doesn't matter. She handed Rodriguez the maintenance log. Write down your groups for the day. All of them. You'll keep a log every session. I want to see the progression, not just the outcome. Rodriguez took the log. Then she said, without looking up from writing, can I ask what it was like? Before this. The operational stuff. No. Rodriguez looked up. Not because I'm hiding it, Mara said. Because it's not useful to you yet. When it's useful, I'll tell you. She picked up her gear bag. What's useful right now is your ring finger tension and your respiratory timing. Rodriguez almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. The ma'am landed in an unexpected way. She wasn't used to it, hadn't been called that in 14 months of yes, senior chief, and name badge interactions. She didn't correct it. Same time Thursday, she said, and walked up the range. The call from D.C. came at 1,400. She was in the training support office, a small room she'd been assigned adjacent to the range building, with a desk and a window that looked at a wall, which was fine when her personal cell phone rang with the area code she'd been avoiding for 22 months. She looked at it for 2 full rings. Then she answered. Hartwell, she said. The voice on the other end was a woman's, clipped, direct, with the particular verbal economy of someone who spends most of their working hours in classified environments where brevity is security. Petty Officer Hartwell. This is Commander Diane Yost, Special Operations Command. I've been briefed on the Redstone situation. I assumed. I'm not calling about the review or the clearance question. Those are resolved. A pause. I'm calling because something has come up that involves you specifically, and I've been asked to make contact before it proceeds further. She pulled a notepad from the desk drawer. Old reflex. Go ahead, she said. 3 weeks ago, a journalist named Emma Chen was taken in a location I won't name on this line. American citizen, embedded with a humanitarian operation. The taking was conducted by a group with a known operational signature, a commander named Yusuf Karim. The pen stopped moving. I know that name, she said. I know you do. Yos's voice was careful. Karim's group is holding Chen at a site we've had under surveillance for 9 days. The recovery operation is in the planning stage. It's not a simple extraction. The site has elevation and standoff issues that make close assault the primary option, but close assault alone has a significant risk profile for the hostage. You need overwatch. We need a specific kind of overwatch. The standoff distance to the optimal position is beyond standard certification range. The wind pattern at the site is irregular. There's a terrain feature that creates a crossdraft at the mid-range that most shooters can't reliably compensate for. She looked at the window, the wall outside it. You've looked at the profile, she said. You have other shooters. We have shooters who can do the distance. We have shooters who can handle the crossdraft. We have one shooter on record who's demonstrated both under operational stress conditions and whose personal history with Karim's organization means she's studied his operational patterns more extensively than anyone else we have access to. A pause. I'm not ordering you. Carr was very specific that this contact is informational only. You're in a non-operational role at Redstone by your own choice, and that choice stands. Mara set the pen down on the notepad. She thought about Emma Chen, who was a name and a situation and a person sitting in a room somewhere in a location she wasn't allowed to know yet, waiting for something to happen that she had no control over. She thought about Karim. She had a complicated relationship with the thought of Karim. Not rage, she'd expected rage to be the primary register, and it wasn't. It was something harder to name, the feeling of an equation that had been left unsolved for 26 months, sitting at the edge of her, thinking the way an unresolved problem sits. Not poisoning everything, just present. If I go, she said, I need to be clear about something before I agree. Go ahead. If I have Kareem in the scope, if he's a target, if the mission profile creates that scenario, I need to know in advance whether I'm authorized to take the shot. Because I need to decide before I'm in that position whether I'll take it. I can't make that decision from the hide. Yost was quiet for a moment. That's an honest request. I've had 26 months to think about what I'd do if I had the chance. I know the answer. I just need to know if it's authorized before I commit. What's your answer? She looked at her hands on the desk. The reconstructed thumb, the steadiness that 14 months of granola bars had not touched. I'm not going to take it, she said, even if it's authorized. Even if he's standing still at 300 meters on a clear day. She paused. Killing him doesn't put anything right. It just ends the equation on the worst possible variable. She picked up the pen again. But I needed to decide that before I was in the scope, not after. Because after is too late to decide anything clearly. Another silence. I'll note that in the operational brief, Yost said. And something in her voice had shifted, not softer, but different in some way that was hard to name over a phone line. I'll send the full profile through Carr's office. You'll have 48 hours to review and confirm or decline. Understood. Hartwell. A pause. For the record, what you just said about deciding before you're in the scope. That's the kind of thinking that makes someone worth bringing. The call ended. She sat at the desk with the phone in her hand for a while. Then she put it face down and looked at the notepad. She hadn't written anything on it except one word, in the margin, where she'd stopped the pen, Kareem. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned the page. She told Mercer that evening, not the operational details, those were not hers to share, but the fact of it. That a request had come, that she'd said yes, pending review of the profile. That it would take her off base for a period she couldn't specify, and that Rodriguez's training would need to be covered in her absence. Mercer listened with his hands behind his back and his face in the configuration she'd come to read as maximum attention. When she finished, he said, "You sure? About going?" "About all of it." She thought about it honestly. "No. But I was sure about taking the cafeteria job, and that turned out to be approximately 50% right. I'm comfortable with 50%. He looked at her for a moment. "Rodriguez's training. I'll cover it personally while you're gone." She responds better to specific correction than general guidance. Don't tell her she's doing well unless she specifically is she'll know if you're managing her. I know how to train people, Hartwell. I know. I'm telling you who she is. He nodded slowly. Fair. She started to go, then stopped. Master Chief. She turned. The morning of the plates. When you got on your knees and helped me pick up the fragments. He waited. That was the first time in about 8 months that anyone had done something for me without wanting something in return. She held his gaze. I didn't know how to do anything with it at the time. I just wanted you to know it mattered. Mercer looked at her for a long moment. The expression he made was not a simple one. My wife says I have no idea how to let a moment land without turning it into a training opportunity, he said. She's usually right. He paused. So I'll just say you're welcome. She went out. The operation took 11 days. She was not permitted to describe it afterward, and she didn't try. What she could say to the people who needed to know was that Emma Chen came home, that the recovery team reached her within 40 seconds of the shot sequence, that the shot sequence itself was 2 rounds, cross-draft compensation calculated, 460 meters from the hide position, wind variable, but in the range she'd worked through in the 48 hours of profile review. Both rounds where they needed to be. She saw Kareem through the scope. He was moving through the lower compound during the extraction window, not a target, not her assignment. Visible for 11 seconds, before he disappeared into a covered position. She tracked him for those 11 seconds with the same attention she gave every element in the scope field. Her breathing was controlled. Her hands were steady. She did not fire. She had decided before she was in the scope. That was what made it possible. The team was extracted at dusk. Emma Chen was dehydrated, frightened, and physically intact. She said 3 words to the extraction team lead. When they reached her, "I knew someone would." The team lead relayed this in the after-action debrief as the most important thing he had heard all week, which said something about the team lead that Mara filed away as useful. She was back at Redstone 11 days after she'd left. Rodriguez had improved. She could see it in the first session after she returned. Something had settled in Rodriguez's position, some component of the earlier uncertainty, resolving into a more grounded state. Mercer's doing, she assumed, or Rodriguez's own Saturday morning work. Probably both. "Your ring finger tension is better," Mara said. "Master Chief told me to think of it as holding a bird," Rodriguez said. "Tight enough that it doesn't leave, loose enough that you don't hurt it." "My father said the same thing." Rodriguez looked at her. "Master Chief said you told him that." "Did he?" "He said your father taught you on a Remington 700 when you were 12. Rodriguez paused. "He said it was important context." She made a note to tell Mercer that his sharing personal context was appreciated, and also none of his business, and then decided not to, because the note it struck in Rodriguez's face was the right one. "Fire your cold string," she said. Rodriguez stepped to the line. The string was cleaner than the last one. Not perfect, the 4th and 7th rounds pulled slightly. The breathing broke rhythm at round 6, but cleaner. The group at 25 meters had a tighter distribution. The center was closer to where it was supposed to be. Rodriguez came off the line and looked at the target for a long moment. "Better," she said. Not asking. "Better," Mara confirmed. "And you know why. Because I practiced it. Because you practiced the right thing. There's a difference." She made a mark in the log. 4 more weeks at this rate, and you'll qualify. 8 more weeks, and you'll be one of the best in your cohort. Rodriguez was quiet with that. "Then, you really think so?" "I don't say things to manage people's feelings. I say what I see." She closed the log. "What I see is someone who finds the problem and corrects it. That's rarer than you think." Rodriguez nodded. Then, with the specific hesitations of someone asking something they've been holding for a while, "When you were gone." "The 11 days. Did it go okay?" Mara looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Did you—" Rodriguez stopped herself. "Sorry. You said not yet?" "Not yet," Mara confirmed. "But closer than last month." Rodriguez almost smiled. She picked up her gear and headed off the line. Mara stayed at the station for a moment, looking downrange at the target with its uneven group and its slow, visible improvement. 6 months later, Maya Rodriguez graduated at the top of her cohort. Mara was at the range when it was announced. She heard it through the base PA system. The names called in order of finish. Rodriguez's name first with the qualification designation that meant advanced certification track. She was setting up the afternoon session for a new group when it came over the speaker, and she stopped what she was doing and let herself feel it for a full 10 seconds. Then she went back to work. The ceremony for the new cohort was held on a Friday morning in late spring when the base had shaken the last of the winter cold, and the light was clean and direct over the quad. 42 trainees in their dress uniforms. Families in the bleachers. The ceremony was the kind of thing that the military does well when it does it correctly. Simple, honest, no excess. Mara stood at the edge of the assembly area in her training support uniform, not on the stage, not in the ceremony's formal structure. Just present. Rodriguez found her afterward, in the 20 minutes of informal movement, after the official portion ended. "Top of cohort," Mara said. "I know." Rodriguez had the expression of someone who was still catching up with a fact that had been true for an hour, but hadn't fully integrated yet. "I almost didn't believe the paw." "I know you didn't." "I watched your face." Rodriguez laughed, a real one. surprised out of her. "Thank you," she said. "I mean it. For the Saturday mornings and the ring finger thing and the breathing and all of it." "That was your work," Mara said. "I found the problem. You fixed it. Every morning, you fixed it." Rodriguez looked at her for a moment with the specific attention of someone who wants to say something right. "Can I ask you one more thing?" "Depends. When you're on the range, when you're really in it, not teaching, just shooting, what do you think about?" Mara considered it. The honest answer was, sometimes Daniel, sometimes nothing. Sometimes the mechanics and nothing else, which was its own kind of peace. Sometimes the memory of a specific morning on a range in Montana, cold and early, her father's voice patient and direct behind her, saying, "You don't aim at where it is, you aim at where it's going to be." "My brother," she said. "Mostly." Rodriguez nodded, like that made sense. "He'd have liked you," Mara added. "He liked people who did the work, instead of talking about doing the work." Rodriguez stood a little straighter with that, involuntarily the way you stand when something lands in the place where you actually live. Then she was called away by her family, a mother, and two younger brothers who'd come from somewhere Mara didn't catch, and who descended on Rodriguez with the uncomplicated joy of people who'd been waiting a long time for this specific Friday. And Rodriguez went into it, into the noise in the arms around her, and looked back once over her shoulder at Mara with an expression that didn't need any words attached. Mara raised one hand, small enough. That evening, she went to the range alone. She didn't need to. The range was closed for the day, and she had a key, because she had a key to everything in the training support role, and she walked the line in the late spring light and let it be quiet for a while. She stopped at Station 12. Her usual station, she'd come to realize not assigned, just the one she gravitated to, the one where the light was best and the wind indicator at the downrange berm was most visible. She stood there without a weapon. She thought about the last 2 years. The cafeteria and the alarm at 4:47 and the granola bars and the crow on the fence post. Boom! The plate fragments and the receiver fracture and the wrist release in the corridor. The biometric reader and Hale's voice and Carr's careful language. The range and the torn collar and the 2 holes in a target 800 meters away. The 11 days and the scope and Kareem's 11 seconds of visibility. And the decision she'd made before she was in the position to need it. She thought about Daniel. She thought about him with the specific quality of grief that has moved past the sharp stage into the longer, slower one, the kind that doesn't ask you to stop doing things, that has learned to coexist with function, that is present the way certain light is present, not overwhelming, not gone, just part of the atmosphere you move through. She was not okay in some clean, concluded sense. She didn't expect to be. Some things don't conclude, they just change the way they're present. But she was here. She was working. She was teaching a 20-year-old trainee how to breathe through fear and find the problem and correct it. And she was finding, in that teaching, something that was not identical to what she'd had before, but was not nothing either. It was enough to build on. She looked downrange at the empty berm in the failing light, and she breathed, and she was steady, and she let that be sufficient. Outside the range fence, the base ran its evening cycle voices, movement, the ordinary percussion of people continuing the work. She listened to it without the distance she'd kept. For 14 months, she let it be the sound of a place she was part of, not hiding in. She turned off the range lights. She locked the gate. She went home. The weapon is never what decides it. The person holding it does what they protect, what they refuse, what they choose to carry, and what they finally set down. That is the only thing worth learning. Everything else is just practice.